Hello, welcome to Inner Conquest, the world's greatest modern metaphysics channel. I'm your host, Jacob Edens. Today we're going to be talking about how to precisely engineer a new reality. So, when you have something in your, you could call it field of awareness, or in your reality that's not necessarily the way you want it to be, and you're looking to change that thing, the process for doing so is the same no matter the circumstance. But what I want to talk about today is the combination of three pillars of 4D thinking, right? So when you think fourth dimensionally, what's the difference between fourth dimensional thinking and normal thinking? Well, if you have a goal, normal thinking is, I'm going to do this, this, and this, then this, this, and this, and then the likelihood of this happening will be this, right? Nothing wrong with that. Totally viable option. Fourth dimensional thinking is if you're at point A and you're trying to go to point B, instead of taking the linear journey there, you immediately put yourself into the end state, which means that you go to the end and you play mental projections as if the end is happening now, right? The mechanics behind doing that are that if I have a visualization now, from a frequency standpoint, I'm matching the frequency of what I'm doing internally to the outcome that I want externally, and I'm dwelling in that dominantly, which means a majority of the time I'm going to that wanted frequency, which, if you're looking at it from a law of attraction standpoint, is going to line you up energetically with the outcome that you want, right? So you're constantly saturating your consciousness in doing that as well. If you're doing it from a law of assumption standpoint, you're holding a feeling state, which is an assumption, right? So if you have an assumption about something, if you hold assumptions, they harden into facts. What does that mean? So if I have an assumption that somebody doesn't like me, if I chronically walk around with that assumption, I'll have a manifestation that will be in alignment with that. They'll be like, you're a piece of trash, right? And it's because I held that assumption, that person said that. Where most people get messed up is they have feedback loops where they have the assumption unconsciously, they have confirmation in the 3D, and they confirm the way that they've been thinking and feeling because this person did this thing when it was actually caused by the assumptive thought and feeling state practices, right? So what I recommend for any type of circumstance that you're changing, right? If you have an experience that is not favorable, whether you're working with an SP, whether you're working with money, whether you're working with health, whether you're working with anything, that occurrence that pops up is always reflective of the internal state. So the second something happens that you don't want, the most powerful thing you can do is revise that from that fourth dimensional state, because what that'll do is that will immediately, from the frequency law of attraction standpoint, fix that frequency bandwidth that you've been in, right? If you're dwelling in an unconscious or unwanted frequency, you want to fix that dominant frequency first and foremost before you do anything externally, simply because no matter where you go, you're always carrying that frequency around with you, right? If you go into Neville Goddard's work, poverty and wealth consciousness are both servants, and they follow you everywhere you go. And the reason for that is because when you go into a state of consciousness and you insert yourself into a state, that state expresses itself. This is really good to know, because if we can pull ourselves out of unwanted states, we can push ourselves into wanted states and allow that to express around us and through us, right? It allows us to master reality on a level that 99.99999% of people will never consciously know how to do, right? Until maybe this stuff becomes more mainstream or etc., right? This is really the key to conscious creation, is understanding how to master and discipline these internal facets of mind. So when you have something that you want, I'm much more active in the thinking process than most people are. I think that when you have something that you want, you should attack it from three angles incessantly until it is normalized. The first and easiest for me personally is an I am so happy and grateful attached affirmation, right? So you hit it from a verbal identity standpoint first, right? So once you have that identity down of how you want to be in terms of the version of you who has what he or she wants, you hit it from the identity standpoint to such a degree that you begin to identify as the person and you start to feel that way internally. Once you start to feel that way internally, the second phase is you want to feel into the state as much as possible, right? So once you have the identity crystallized, now you feel into it. And what you're doing at first is you're dipping your toes into the water. This state is a byproduct of you being in an unwanted state, right? So Neville calls this the old man, the old state that you're looking to rid yourself of, whether that be poverty, sickness, whatever. That old state is going to dwell because you've dwelled in it. So what you have to do is you have to start taking little breaks of freedom from your fucking suffering, and you have to go into the new state over and over and over again. You're not going to be able to hold it immediately and normalize it immediately, because if you have something that you're really desperate to get out of, you're still too emotionally attached to that old state. So you have to become indifferent, and then you have to start tipping your toe into the feeling state of the new state until you start more dominantly going into that new state instead of falling back into that old state and reacting to it. And once you start to get that mental mechanic to where you're like, oh, everything's just states. I just have to do the internal state work, and then the external stuff will take care of itself. It gets a lot easier, because every time you take an emotional journey from an old state to a new state, that muscle gets stronger. And what happens is eventually that muscle gets so strong, and I'm talking like a couple months of doing it. It's not a long time, right? You're able to identify and discern what states you're in, and you can quickly shift yourself. And even if you can't express that or hold it dominantly, you know how to train yourself to keep going back into these new states, right? So once you have that identity, I amness, that's your core. I am this, right? So you're going from poverty to wealth. I am wealthy. You still have all this poverty consciousness. I am wealthy. You're building that internally. It's small at first. It's like a little fire. You keep affirming. It starts expanding, right? As that core expands, now you have some emotional bandwidth to feel kind of what it feels like to be in that new state, right? Now, what happens? Your external, because you're building that new internal state, is now opposing your external environment, because your external environment is a pushed out version of the previous state that you were in, right? So even though internally you feel like you're doing a lot, your third dimensional reality is slow to change, and you may doubt yourself. You may question yourself. You may go, oh my God, am I fucking crazy doing this all the time? No, you're not, because you have to understand that it's an inward-outward process. So once you cultivate it inward, now your job is to sustain it. And this is why dwell is a perfect word, because you're revisiting that state. You're revisiting that identity over and over and over and over and over again until you feel that that has become your normalized kind of habitual conscious pattern. The thing that you have working to your advantage is that states of consciousness are highly addictive, right? So the reason it's so difficult in some circumstances to pull somebody out of a wealth or a poverty state of consciousness, or pull them out of sickness, is because that state has addictive properties that they cannot habitually overcome until they're so sick of it that they decide that they're going to shift and start embodying that new state, right? So you want to avoid that, and you want to be really good at indifference, because indifference is literally a knife that cuts you off from bullshit. If you're indifferent to something, it can't get emotional talons into you, and it can't bind with you, and it cannot be occupied by you, right? So as you start to feel into a new state, what you're really doing is you're binding yourself to a new wanted state. So you want to have emotional control in that anything that you dislike, you become indifferent to, and anything that you like, you begin to bind and occupy through not only self-identification, I am so happy and grateful now, I am this thing, but also through extrasensory perception of feeling what it feels like to be wealthy, feeling the money coming in, feeling the health, feeling the relationships, right? You feel into these processes, and then you begin to normalize them. And then as you begin to cultivate what is called an emotional grid, which is a dominant wavelength frequency of having what you want to have from an emotional, etheric consciousness standpoint, now you begin to put mental projections, mental movies, and all of the different specific fine details of what you want overlaid onto that conscious grid. And once you start really living in that reality, now you have crystallized permanently a state of consciousness that is your servant that will follow you wherever you go. Meaning that you can lay aside all other processes, because if you embody the state of health, if you embody the state of wealth, if you embody the state of having great relationships, it don't fucking matter what you do. It's just going to happen and unfold all the time like that. And that is why we study metaphysics. That is why we understand the laws of assumption, the laws of attraction, vibration, frequency, all of these things, because they are the toolbox that allow us to create life on a much higher, more customizable level, which is really who we are at the end of the day. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Check out the link tree if you want some badass coaching. Other than that, leave comments with questions or any videos that you'd like made. But the most important thing I have to say today is go conquer, and I'll see you in the next one.